John Carpenter, early career, I guess, first half of the career, retrospective. And joining me is Jerry Smith. And hopefully, we might have some late arrivals, but we'll just roll along with what we got here on John Carpenter's birthday. So, Jerry, if you want to drop a short synopsis of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for letting me be on here. I'm really excited. Anytime I get to talk about John Carpenter's career is
Oh, Lord and
awesome.
Savior.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, lifelong hero. Yeah, my name's Jerry Smith. I'm a journalist. I write for Dread Central, Wicked Horror, in the past, Scream Magazine, Fangoria, other stuff. I'm kind of all around the place. So yeah, that's me.
Very nice. You should all should definitely check out his work if you are not familiar. Um, but he is Jerry is a Carpenter
Jerry is
fanatic.
just. Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, you good?
Oh no, no. The Jerry is just okay at Twitter. Is usually where I talk to people. So
Nice, nice.
didn't mean to interrupt you
And
there.
your account's not banned.
No, it's
You've not
not.
received a
Thankfully.
lifetime ban. So,
Yeah. I like being able to log into Twitter.
but you also know how to make like a fake account if you needed to. So
Yeah.
it makes you wonder sometimes.
Right.
So Carpenter, I mean, he's done a little bit of everything, right? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why I've always been so fascinated with his career. I mean, like I said before we started recording, we all think of when we talk about John Carpenter, we all think about master of horror John Carpenter, and rightfully so. He's earned that title. But what I love about his career, especially this era that we're talking about right now, is it shows how all across the board he is. I mean, from his student films to Escape from New York and other films. I mean, he wasn't just, or he's still alive. He's not just a filmmaker that's just about horror. I mean, growing up, he was super obsessed with Western and science fiction films and that kind of stuff. And I think that shows in his work, even in his horror films. I think there's very much, I mean, when we get into Assault on Precinct 13, I mean, that is most definitely a modern day Western in so many ways.
Yep.
I mean, I feel like if Howard Hawks, was around during that time, he would have made that movie. I mean, he kind of did, Rio Bravo. But yeah, I mean, I love Carpenter. He can do any genre perfectly, I think.
I think that's a good observation. He definitely brings that Western flavor, which seems to be a very pervasive theme even today. I mean, look at The Mandalorian and that very deliberate framing of, it's a lone gunslinger against the world, against the universe. It's a common motif in a lot of his movies, really.
That was actually, I mean, just the Western kind of tone to a lot of his films. That's what got me into his films as a kid. My dad raised me as a single parent, and he was always working full time. So my grandmother kind of babysit us nonstop. I was born in '81, so during the '80s, and my grandma was so obsessed with Westerns. And I mean, films like Assault on Precinct 13 would be playing on like Fox or like these local channels. And that movie felt enough like a Western to where my grandma would sit and watch it and let me watch these movies, with her. And I was always that awkward kid. I didn't have many friends growing up. And, so I'd be the kid that instead of sleepovers, I would do like the 5 movies for 5 days for $5 VHS deals, spend my whole weekends by myself in my room watching these movies, learn, the names of the actors, the set decorators, the editors, the directors. So, I mean, even when I was like 7 or 8 years old, I was super obsessed with John Carpenter as a filmmaker, which, I mean, didn't do me any favors in popularity at school. Everyone wanted to talk about Chris Cross, not like John Carpenter, So, like, yeah, I mean, that Western thing, like, I love Western movies, even to this day. I mean, I could put in like The Proposition or like, more modern day Westerns and enjoy them, or old ones. And I think Carpenter, having that love for that, he was able to definitely put that into a lot of his early work.
And we also touched on, before we started recording this, just as our, shoot the shit preamble, the heavy skew towards the sci-fi in the early career, and how that was a very major theme, like really up until The Thing. Dark Star and Starman, and
Mhm.
just that influence that he seemed to have really put into the films, and kind of went away from. Uh, and I guess you kind of touched on it. I think this is probably the right answer for that. He's never really said anything about it, but wanting to go back to safety and filmmaking, and sticking to what works and what studios wanted to pay for, because the thing was a box office failure. Obviously, not a failure in everybody's hearts and minds in the year 2020. But with the smash success of Halloween, was that 1978 or 9? The first one came out.
78, yeah.
78. Yeah, I mean, like that whole launching of the slasher genre there in the late 70s, and the competing triumvirate of Jason and Michael Myers and Freddy. They got that big arms race launching franchises, and I think you kind of sucked all the oxygen out of the room for innovation there, and the IP kind of got out of his control. But,
no, totally, and even even some of the stuff he created ended up biting him in the ass, to be honest.
Yep.
I mean, he didn't want to make a sequel to Halloween. He had no desire to. That ending was the ending, and when the suits came in with a lot of money saying, we're basically going to do this with or without you, do you want to produce it and write it? He wrote Halloween 2 drunk, completely drunk, regretted every single thing he wrote about that movie, disowned it publicly, called it abomination. So like the slasher craze came in, and Carpenter's trying to do all these unique things through the 80s, and every time he tried to do something outside the box, like it backfired.
Yep.
We got this awesome kind of like modern day Western turned kung fu movie with Big Trouble in Little China, and that didn't do well, and when he tried to like get back into horror, kind of like I hate to use the word safe thing to do, because I think every Carpenter film has like this great kind of
approach. Oh yeah. Not to knock any of his stuff. I think he still managed to find a way
totally
to make it his without being cookie cutter, for sure.
But even I think any of his big gambles have come back to bite him financially. I mean, Prince of Darkness is my second favorite Carpenter movie, but that went over so many people's heads when it came out, because you're talking about like quantum physics and all these things that like people in the 1980s had no desire.
They were ready for that. They just wanted, Jason Voorhees walking around killing the same group of counselors that inexplicably keep going to the same damn place.
Exactly.
People got murdered 6 months earlier.
Exactly. And like even later in his career, when he came back to try to do that kind of more sci-fi like approach, I mean, Memoirs of Invisible Men is his worst experience ever, and that's one of the only Carpenter movies that does not say John Carpenter's above it, for a good reason. That Village of the Damned, people hated that movie. So his whole career has been trying to take these risks, and none of them paying off, with the exception of Halloween, The Fog, that kind of stuff. And then years later, everyone reevaluates it and calls it a classic. But I mean, I saw Carpenter at a Fangoria convention. I think it was 2008, 2009, one of those. And the moderator of the panel was going over every single film of his career. And 2 or 3 into it, Carpenter just put a stop to it. And he goes, my movies came out, nobody watched them, and now they call them classics. Can we move on? Let's take questions. Like, he has this kind of like curmudgeon, grumpy old man thing that he's known for.
He got shit on.
Exactly. I can totally understand it. Like, if I had that career where everyone's calling me like a master of something, but nobody watched any of my movies theatrically, I would have the reach out my hand and put a check in it approach too. But I do feel like he's earned it. And I mean, like you said, those sci-fi movies he's done are great. Like Dark Star's such an interesting like feature debut, I think.
I think Dark Star really, I think it's such a big influence on the like dark sci-fi. People don't ever talk about it, and I really think you see a lot of elements from Dark Star show up in other genre movies. I mean, you have the deadpan pseudo evil computer, like you're lost in space. I mean, they're all classic sci-fi tropes, but it's such a good dark campy movie that I don't know. It really is criminally underrated.
That and
even
like
from
what
Carpenter fans.
Oh, totally, totally. I agree with you 100%. That and what I've always found so fascinating about that movie is that movie was such a launching pad for so many people. I mean, not just John Carpenter, but I mean Dan O'Bannon
Yep.
is so funny in that movie, and like his script stuff that he wrote for it is just amazing. And you know, and in a lot of ways, like Alien is almost kind of a remake of Dark Star. You know, I think Dan O'Bannon took his frustrations with Carpenter and that whole like they had a feud after that movie came out, and kind of took that to Alien, and that ended up being one of the most influential films of all time. And I don't feel like that would have happened, you know, if Dark Star didn't.
No,
And I don't think
agree.
I don't think Assault or Halloween would have happened if Dark Star didn't. But like, I think one interesting thing that we were talking about before we started recording is his student films. Like, we don't have to get super into them, but like his first one, The Resurrection of Bronco Billy. I mean, like we were talking about, he won. They like Carpenter and all of his collaborators. They won an Oscar for that while in film school. You know,
Yeah,
like
who does that? Who wins a major award for, you know, usually shitty student films? I mean,
it's an interesting little film. Like I think last time I watched it, I think it's maybe 20 minutes long, if that. And it's basically this man that's so obsessed with Westerns and Western culture that that's all he thinks about. Like when he's out on the town in a busy city, he hears like, you know, cows and horses. And he gets so obsessed with this idea, and everyone's kind of looking down on him. And it's honestly, like, I hate to get too like philosophical about a student film from, you know, that time, but like it's very much, I think, how artists live. You know, like as a writer, especially if you're, you know, you've been a professional writer. There was growing up, you know, my parents would always tell me like, why are you always thinking about writing? Like, you're never going to do anything with that, you know? And I think Bronco Billy is such a good look at kind of those dreamer kind of people, you know. And the film that followed that, Captain Voyeur, you know, it's all about this man that's obsessed with this woman that he sees and kind of stalks her. And the approach, even though it's a little kind of like fantastical as far as like silly music, the approach on Captain Voyeur, I mean, there's scenes that are straight up lifted from Captain Voyeur.
The POV.
Halloween.
I mean, and where does that whole technique really start getting copied from? It's from, I mean, Halloween did it first, really, truly, and earnest as a slasher movie. I mean, you have Hitchcock employ it, but it really didn't get used until Halloween comes on the scene.
No, totally.
Everybody wants to be the camera from the bushes watching the targets, you know.
No, totally. And when Halloween came out, everyone started getting like, they tried to lift so hard from Halloween and recapture this kind of lightning in a bottle. But Carpenter didn't even think he was making anything profound. Like, he just needed another paycheck. And that's what I've always loved about Carpenter, especially his early career. Like, he made sure that he knew how to do everything in case something didn't land. You know, when he was having trouble in between winning that Oscar and, you know, directing, you know, other things, he sold scripts, you know, like The Eyes of Laura Mars was just a spec script, or, you know, Black Moon Rising. You know, if he wasn't going to be a director, he was going to be a writer.
He was a mercenary. You know? And I mean, he did anything he needed to do to make his career work. And I think that paid dividends.
And like, he kind of becomes this kind of force to be reckoned with, because I mean, like we were saying earlier, you know, not just directing, not just writing, but like his dad, which was, you know, a musician, taught him so much about music that, like, especially back in the day, like if you hire John Carpenter to make a movie, like you're cutting your cost in some ways, because, you know, pay him a few extra bucks, he'll do the score, which will end up being iconic. So it's kind of like this Renaissance man approach to filmmaking that we really don't see anymore.
I mean, now I would wager things are just too complicated. It's hard to even do all that. I mean, you've got people that just make their entire career doing one facet of the process. You know, like, look at Hans Zimmer is just like the de facto composer for, you know, any big ticket sci-fi or, you know, superhero / action movie. He's going to be in charge of it, you know. But get you a man that can direct and compose.
No, definitely. I mean,
and write.
Assault on Precinct 13, which is, I mean, one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, if I'm not mistaken, I think he scored that movie on the fly in like 2 days, 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, he just poops excellence.
It's right. Like, I wish I could do that. Not
I mean,
poop excellence, but
I poop, but it's not excellence.
it's not excellent.
It's not excellence. No one would compliment me.
Yeah.
What I could bang out on a keyboard in 2 days. But I mean, it's just so iconic, and his scores are. I mean, you know, sight unseen when you're hearing a John Carpenter score. It's just got that telltale signature.
Mm-hmm.
Just the background synth. It's like a low drone that builds. I don't know how to describe it, but he has just a. And I'm a big sucker for like electronic music production. I'm not really a musical person myself, but as a tech guy, I've always loved like the implementation of, you know, technology into a art that is, you know, for most of human history has been an analog skill. You know, it's all muscle memory and the fine craftsmanship, physical properties of the actual materials of the instruments and the shapes of the instruments. So when we decided that we could start using transistors and vacuum tubes and like, you know, circuits to make sound, I think that really added a new layer to what was already a pretty rich human invention.
Oh, most definitely. And I think one of the biggest travesties, in my opinion, is that 9 out of 10 conversations about John Carpenter, most people kind of forget how influential he was musically. I mean, that synth kind of score, you know, I Carpenter and also Wendy Carlos.
Yep.
Because, I mean, Wendy Carlos is never talked about, and her music is so influential. Like, even the couple cues that she did for The Shining are so iconic. And as far as like electronic music, I mean
it's just, yeah, they just get it. Just it's what they built was a foundation. It's a foundation, and what is a foundation? It's what everything else is built on, and you really don't notice it's there half the time. But if it wasn't there, you wouldn't have something built on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I look at, you know, another influential. I mean, that same era. Once you leave the late '60s into the early '80s, I mean, you also have like Vangelis and Blade Runner, like these very environmental, synthesizer heavy, non-vocal soundtracks really appear, and they become a mainstay. And that, you know, in the '80s filmmaking, it just goes more and more popular, and now, I mean, there's not a movie where you don't have at least some section that has a, you know, purely digital. It's just that it's so much cheaper to make. I mean, it's not, you don't need a live orchestra to record. There's nothing wrong with that. There's obviously a place for that always if you want to have that in your production, but it's a very accessible version of the old art. And
yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because these days, like you said, I mean, most things have that. And I think like shows like Stranger Things and all these things kind of brought that to the forefront again. And that's great. Like, I'm totally not one of those people that like something I've always been into blows up and I'm like, like, not at all.
I was
like,
there first.
If a band that I like blows up, if anything, like, awesome, they'll get to tour more. You know, I'll get to see them more.
It's like more stuff.
Right, exactly. Like, I'm definitely not like that. But at the same time, it's just like I think a lot of people kind of forget where that stuff came from. If there wasn't Carpenter, if there wasn't,
there'd be no vaporwave, there'd be no synth pop.
Exactly. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, there would be no churches without John Carpenter.
Oh yeah, or I mean, look at what Gunship's done. Going back to that evocative. I mean, there'd be no Gunship if there was no John Carpenter and Wendy Carlos.
Mm-hmm. Like, and I think that even goes back to, like, you know, his early career, like we're talking about. You know, like, John Carpenter was always, I think, business minded. Like, I can get this movie made a lot quicker than I could if I went through all the regular steps. I could get it made quicker if I just do the music, if I write it. Or, I mean, Bronco Billy, if I co-write it, if I edit it, if I score it, you know, like...
It was born of necessity. It was like, you know, that's invention was born out of that. Like it was a hard scrabble. It was an intentional decision because there was no alternative. You don't have money to pay all these people for a production when you aren't even sure you're going to get paid yourself.
Oh, exactly. And I think that kind of burned a lot of bridges for him. I mean, Dan O'Bannon and Carpenter had that huge falling out because after, Dark Star was kind of completed, they kind of stole it back from USC because of how robbed they got with the Oscar for Bronco Billy. A producer came in, offered him more money if they'd, pad the movie a little bit. Dan O'Bannon was like, Mr. Auteur, my art is my art, don't touch it. Carpenter, who wanted to have a career in filmmaking, was like, give me the money, I'll do it. And that kind of butted heads they butted heads for decades, but Carpenter, that's what's I think so great about him as a filmmaker, that he's very much an auteur in a way. Like, every film says John Carpenter's this film, he
was practical.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think he was business-minded enough to say, like, okay, if I play the game this way, I'll get to make more movies. And I think as time went on and the whole landscape changed, he just got less interested in playing that game, and now he just wants to smoke weed and play video games, which...
And now he's earned it. He
exactly.
did the work early on to live the life he wanted to later. He's not...
No, totally. And, he just released a new single from Lost Themes 3 that's coming out pretty soon. He just released a new single, and it's still some of the best music I've heard.
It feels like a lost score from Escape from New York is what it felt like to me.
Oh, and that's what I love about these Lost Themes albums, is that like you listen to them and you're able to kind of fill in the blanks as far as like a film in your own head. And I think that any music, when done properly, does that. It doesn't need to give you everything in front of you. It allows the cues breathe inside of you, and it allows you to like picture things. And what's so great about Carpenter's music, even in the early days, I'll probably end up talking about Assault on Precinct 13 nonstop just because I love it. But you hear those themes from that.
It's beautiful.
You hear those themes from that movie, and you're instantly right back into like watching that movie. Like, it is some of the most memorable music ever.
And it's that movie in particular is such a... It's a build-up. It's a very consistent and steady build-up to that climax. That final attack on the police station. Like it keeps going. It reminds me. A modern comparison to Assault on Precinct 13 to me would be like a Dunkirk, where it's unnerving the entire time. Something bad's going to happen even before the first time you ever watch the movie. You're like, this is not going to end well. This is not going to end well. When does it happen? When does the shit hit the fan? And you're just like on the edge of your seat, and that score just builds that anxiety, like in a good way. It's like it's so unnerving, and that drone in like Dunkirk, that Hans Zimmer, just it's different, but it's the same. You just feel it. I was so unnerved I watched it in theaters, and I was like, I can't put my finger on it, but I'm just really uncomfortable, and that really puts you in that setting.
Yeah, that's really
it's like
cool.
A physical discomfort. I don't know how else.
No,
to
totally.
Put it.
I feel the same way about Dunkirk. Another film that's very similar that gave me that kind of feeling that I had watching Assault on Precinct 13, and it was another war movie. I remember going to the theater and seeing 1917.
Yep. And that's a one shot too, which adds to that.
And you get to the end where like he has the opportunity to save the day, and he's just running across that field, and people are getting blown up in the background. Like, Assault does that.
Yeah.
And it's such a mean movie. Like, it is so mean and cynical. There's some positivity in it, but it's straight from like
nobody's safe. Like, there's they killed
that little girl gets shot, right?
The little girl gets shot, and what's that prisoner they were transporting that was sick gets killed, like sitting ducks, like people that would normally be protected in a script, that you bond with.
What's really cool? Safe. No, totally. I agree with you. And what's really cool about that is with his bad guys in that, like, Carpenter didn't just put like very stereotypically kind of racist characters in that. Like, you get the main gang, and there's an Asian man, there's a white man, there's a black man, there's a Hispanic man. Like, it's showing the worst of everybody in that movie.
It's the detritus of what is it? It's set in L.A., fictional L.A., right?
Yeah,
somewhere in California.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a cross sampling of shitty people that are just lowlifes that will do anything to prove a point.
No, totally. And I love films that kind of put a microscope on just how imperfect humans are. Like, I love the fact that there's a mutual respect between the two leads in Assault.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, you have a cop that's very committed to his job, and you have a man that's going to death row, you know, for, like, probably some heinous thing that we were never told about. You know, and by the end of the movie, there's this mutual respect of, you believe in what you believe, you know, I believe in what I believe, you know, we could coexist. And I don't mean that like today's political landscape.
Oh, yeah,
I'm not trying to,
no,
I'm totally not trying to be metaphorical whatsoever.
No, definitely.
No.
We're past that point.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that. But as far as the movie, I like how much like of the spotlight Carpenter always gives to the anti-heroes. You know, like Snake Plissken isn't a good person.
Yeah.
You know, just
but
like Jack Burton.
Yeah,
exactly. Just like Jack
so
Burton. Totally. Like Jack Burton in Big Trouble in Little China. He's an idiot. You know, like Carpenter said a million times. We think Jack Burton's the hero of that movie. He's the sidekick who thinks he's the hero. Like, and a lot of Carpenter's films kind of have that. This person,
and I think that theme continues past. I mean, obviously this is a jump forward, but I mean, even like They Live. I mean, Roddy Piper is just an everyman. He's like, he gets thrown into the role of a hero, but he doesn't.
Yeah, his name's John Nada. That's how like whatever he is.
So that's a theme. The anti-hero theme is another reason why I've always loved Carpenter films. I mean, think about like Halloween, like Dr. Loomis. I love like Donald Pleasance, but he's completely deranged. I mean, everybody's written him off. He was right the entire time, but the way he goes about it, he's a zealot, and nobody trusts him. Nobody believes him. And
that's my favorite thing about that entire series. Totally, that's my favorite thing about that entire series.
So myopic to stop Michael Myers that
he becomes just as crazy as Myers by the end of that series. I mean, you know, I'm wearing a Halloween 5 shirt right now. Like in Halloween 5, Loomis is like basically offering a child to Michael Myers to get him to come down the stairs. And I mean, obviously that's so far removed from Carpenter's vision, but like even in the first Halloween, you know, you have Loomis, who's just lost his mind. He spent his whole life trying to reach this person, and now he's past that point, and he's like, I'm gonna stop him no matter what. And like, what's so genius about Halloween, and it's been said a million times, so even though it's my favorite movie of all time, it's like, what can I say that's not been said about this movie? But after that movie, suddenly you get kind of like the Scream approach, where everything's dissected in movies like, no, this means that, these are the rules, and I hate that stuff. But the character of Laurie, which, I mean, massive props to Deborah Hill, too, because, I mean, when we talk about Halloween, and even Carpenter's career...
Deborah's influence, like, the both of them working together. I mean, the early Carpenter career wouldn't exist without Deborah Hill, too.
Exactly, I mean, and, you know...
She was a genius.
She was definitely responsible for a lot of, you know, the dialogue that we all love from Halloween, too, and the characters. But even the character of Laurie in Halloween, like... that character's been unfairly put into that kind of virginal thing, like, oh, she didn't die because she wasn't a virgin. Laurie would have had sex had somebody liked her. Like, she was hot for Ben Tramer in that first movie, you know? Like, you know, like, and that's what I love about Halloween, is that you have either known or you've been one of the characters from that movie at some point in your life. Yep. You know, like, for me personally, like, I was, you know, without going too much into details, I was very abused as a child, so I was very like kind of awkward to myself, you know, very Laurie Strode-esque, and that's my favorite character of all time.
You're a fighter, you survive. That's, I mean, and that's been her. I mean, at least they've stayed consistent with that through all the, you know, obviously Carpenter's role is diminished in the continuation of the franchise, but Laurie Strode's always been a kick-ass, badass heroine, you know, fighter. So
yeah, and I love that Carpenter's always, I mean, when we think of him, we think more of the male characters, I think, because, I mean, who doesn't love McCready and The Thing and, you know, Jack Burton, Snake Plissken, you know, all these different people. But I love how many really strong female types, you know, like, I think Stevie Wayne is one of my favorite characters of all time from The Fog. I mean, Adrienne Barbeau is so good in that movie. And, like, I think we get so used to Carpenter that we kind of forget how good Carpenter is. I mean, those early movies, Assault, Halloween, and all those, those were super indie movies that had
yeah, they're all very different.
And that was what's so
different.
cool about his approach. These days, you get these indie filmmakers, you know, who they don't have much money, so they're kind of like staying within their lane. Carpenter didn't have any money, yet he insisted on like huge, wide cameras and lenses, you know? If he didn't have the money, he was going to make it look like $1 million anyways. And I think that's what makes his early work stand out from a lot of filmmakers' early work. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think it's one of the most perfect films of all time. But you watch that, and it feels like you're watching a documentary. It's dirty. Yep. And as much as I love Tobe Hooper, I don't think that was like on purpose. If he had more money, it probably would have looked a little glossier.
Yeah.
Carpenter,
sure.
on the other end, Carpenter, he made the smallest movies look huge. And I think that speaks volumes on him even early on in his career.
And I guess it's like a technique. I just don't see, like, it's just ingenious to have the vision to know what you want. I cannot ever like state that enough about anybody. It's always just so impressive when you can make something be what you want it to be from start to finish. It doesn't mean that after the fact you're like, well, I wish we would have done this different. I mean, you know, everybody has 20/20 hindsight, but I mean, you really feel like, you know, most of his major releases, they were what he wanted them to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they feel like a movie that you would have dreamed up, you know, fueled on a synthesizer fever dream.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know, like, it's just like my favorite John Carpenter film, period, and one of my favorite films, period, of all time is, I fucking love Escape from New York.
It's so good.
Love Escape from New York. It's just, I fucking love it. It's just the anti-hero. It's a dystopian future. You know, it's just such a cool damn movie. And it was just done, so it just drops you in a world that you had no idea existed, and you get no background, you get no fleshing it out, you just dropped in it. And I've always loved that about a lot of his movies. You're just kind of like, there's no, like I said, there's no real exposition. I mean, sometimes you get the cool beginning crawl, but it's like, you know, they're not holding your hand the entire plot, telling you why things are the way they are. And I really appreciate that about the Carpenter movies. They really do. You have to watch them several times to catch everything. And Halloween 3 is another example of just a bizarro ass movie that, you know, didn't get the love it deserved. I mean, the whole premise of Halloween being an anthology series originally, like, that missed opportunity. And what that
I think so too. Like, I will forever champion the series just because I love them. But dude, like, I would kill to go back in time and be like a suit and be like, you know what, this didn't make much money. Let's continue on this anthology thing because one of them will stick, you know, like, and, you know, you were talking about Escape from New York. I love that one for so many reasons. And I think that one in particular really shows something. Another thing that Carpenter isn't given a lot of credit for is how good he is at casting ensemble movies.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
so many big people in that, and none of them overshadow.
The casting in Escape from New York is just insane. I mean, like,
I still get surprised every time, you know, Van Cleef and you know, Isaac. I still lose my shit when Isaac Hayes shows up. The first scene is the Duke of New York. It's like, what the hell? Like, what is this movie? Like,
that movie gets you so invested in characters that, like, years later, when I was in the theater watching, you know, the sequel. And that didn't land the same way for me, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, that I was still invested enough to be like, you know what? I just want to see Snake Plissken again.
I love Snake Plissken. I was like, I want to see him in another bullshit adventure, if another.
Exactly. Like, I will go to bat for Escape from LA. Like, it's not a great movie by any means, but it's a chance to, like, hang out with Snake Plissken again.
I mean,
and,
I
like,
loved Shot Clock in Escape from LA. I thought that was great. Like, I mean, there were moments. It was just like, you know, it's kind of a product of its time, being in that early 90s when CG was really starting and they were diminishing practical. I mean, you can tell where the studio really bossed Carpenter around a lot more.
Yeah.
You know, they had to do a lot with that. I mean, because he wanted it to be, it was supposed to be, Snake Plissken was supposed to be a multiple film anti-hero. Like, he's always being called in to clean up somebody else's messes against his own will. You know, and
he's just tired of it.
Yeah,
I think
he just,
those are my
I love
favorite
it. He's just
characters.
so
Like,
pissed off, and he's so good at what he does, but he doesn't want to do it. And I think that's a parallel to John Carpenter, like as
oh,
you mentioned.
John Nada and They Live, Roddy Piper's character, he doesn't want to do that shit. Like, he doesn't want,
Who
like
does?
none
Nobody
of
wants to
his
clean up the
characters
messes.
do. I mean, the main character in Assault, he doesn't want to have to babysit this precinct. Like, he just got a promotion. He wants to, do his job.
It's closing
And,
the
like,
next day anyway. Like, what's the point?
no, totally.
Why
And
couldn't they have left earlier? Like, it's the whole thing was
like,
avoidable.
Escape from New York and so many Carpenter's movies, they're so influential in ways that, like, I think even a lot of us don't realize. I mean, I was watching the new video by The Weeknd for the song Save Your Tears, and the makeup, he's wearing prosthetic makeup on it, and
it's so bizarre.
It looks identical to Bruce Campbell in Escape from LA.
Yep.
And then I posted online about that, and then I was reminded that there's a song on The Weeknd's new album called Escape from LA. And that there's so many little subtle things. I mean, even the font that Carpenter uses, like, I can't see that at a business or anywhere without bugging my wife, going, "Oh, hey, it's the Carpenter font," and she'll get like really pissed, be like, "What?" Like, they're not trying to copy John Carpenter.
Well, I mean,
but like,
it's somebody that was so big, and that's I understand why that would be so upsetting after living your entire career. I mean, it'd be the same as like Van Gogh coming. It's like the Doctor Who thing when he comes back and it's like, "Damn, you actually appreciated me. Like, why weren't you there when I was doing it? Why did you let me die in misery?"
Such a great episode.
But it's like he just such a monumental influence on the industry. And will never properly get the credit that's deserved. To have that much power, to have that much unknown true influence on just every facet is incredible. Because if you're a Carpenter fan, you see it, but most people don't make those connections.
And he's always been the kind of person that if he wants to do something, he's gonna do it. Like, I interviewed his wife Sandy for an article I did last year. And we were talking about their comic book company because I'm huge into comics. I love everything that John and Sandy are doing with Storm King Comics. And she was saying that, they were having all these meetings for these properties to turn into TV shows and all this stuff. They were meeting with all these people. And all these people are like, "Oh, we're going to cut this," giving them all the notes. And then she's like, "Well, screw it. We'll just make a comic book out of it." And so she went home and told John, "Forget this movie. We'll make a comic out of it." And he's like, "Well, what do we know about comic books?" She's like, "Well, nothing." Cut to now, they have like a comic book company. Like, John and Sandy, they want to do something. They'll figure it out. And that goes back to his films. Like, and I said that he kind of knew how to play the game more than O'Bannon. I think that if anything, that is what bit him, in the butt in his career, is that he got to a point, I think at some point, where he was playing the game, but maybe he didn't play it enough. Like, I think doing a movie like Santa Claus the movie would have been so huge for him because it was like a big mainstream movie, but he demanded $1 million to direct it. That, or, O'Bannon, and John kind of had that falling out over that creative difference. He agreed with Irwin Yablans, one of the producers of Halloween, to do The Fog for him. And then when John got into a conversation with a bigger producer who said, "I could give you this much money," he completely shirked that to go with this other guy, got sued by Yablans. So I feel like if anything has bit him, I think it's like maybe having his eyes on the prize a little too much and not realizing that
definitely a mercenary, like definitely a warrior for getting the job done. Like the end justifies the means, and that burns a lot of bridges. I mean, it really can bite you in the ass.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, as far as his work, I mean, even as a person, I mean, he's one of the nicest guys ever.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't feel like he's he's definitely not a dickhead or anything.
I don't tell this story often, but I think it's really cool. My son,
he's a native Kentuckian, so as one of my compatriots, I mean, I would certainly hope he's a good person. Yeah, I have no doubt that he is.
My son Dexter has autism and had like a very hard few years in school, like in kindergarten, first grade. All the kids didn't want to hang out with him because they thought he was weird and all these things. and he, from an early age, my obsession became my son's obsession. He just loves everything John Carpenter. And so John and Sandy, like, they sent my son a care package, and it had like this out of print Escape from New York DVD that was like That's 2 discs and signed. It had comic books, CDs, everything. So like, while he has this kind of like cranky persona, that guy, and I've met him a couple times for interviews and that kind of stuff, and he's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. So like, I almost feel like it's easier to put up that front, like, I'm crotchety. Mm-hmm. He's actually like a really cool guy.
He definitely seems like somebody you could have a beer with, for sure.
Or just play video games.
Yeah, I mean, you just gotta. It's just a vicious industry, and I think it destroys a lot of people. And I think you have to put up those kinds of guards to keep yourself honest and true. Well, otherwise, you'll lose yourself.
Oh, totally. And I think the landscape has changed so much that we might never get another Carpenter movie because, I mean, at his age, why go through the headache, like
it makes me sad to realize that, but I mean, as long as he's making stuff, I mean, the comics and the composing, it's better than nothing. I'm glad he didn't fade off into the sunset.
It sounds so cheesy to say.
I mean, that is a Western thing to do, so he hasn't done
right.
That. He's gonna go out in a blaze of glory.
Just needs a horse. No, like. It sounds cheesy to say, but I got really emotional sitting in the theater watching David Gordon Green's Halloween and hearing Carpenter's music again in a Halloween movie. Because like, as much as I love Alan Howarth and everything he did musically for Halloween, having a new Halloween movie scored by John Carpenter, as someone who's just, it is, and as someone who's like worshipped his career my entire life, and as someone who's very into composing myself, like, it was a dream come true to see him return to like the best as far as I'm concerned. And like, his whole career has been like, just when you think that like Carpenter's done, he'll come back out with something, like when The Thing bombed so bad because everyone wanted to see basically E.T., like, yeah, he lost, he got fired from Firestarter because of that. There's so many setbacks. And even though they didn't make a lot of money, he came back out with like movies that are like some of like fans' favorite movies. I mean, Big Trouble in Little China.
It just churned him out. He came back with a vengeance. I mean, he rolled them out every other year for a decade there.
Totally.
In his prime.
And I think
like a Stephen King level of obscene productivity. Like,
no, totally.
Who does that?
I think that his early work, I think, really set the foundation for everything that we know, because I mean, there's no way that Universal would have hired him to do The Thing if The Fog wouldn't have been so successful and great. And it's such a great movie. I think that's one of the weirdest movies in his whole filmography. Like, because it's this kind of like restrained ghost story. It
is very simple on its face, but it works so well, like the way he does it.
And like, and I said it earlier, and I'll say it again, but like the whole Master of Horror thing, like I almost feel like it's kind of a bummer to hear with John Carpenter. And now he embraces it, it's like its Twitter handle, I think. But but like, and I know we're not going into that era, but like a movie like Starman, which like I was saying before we recorded, like, it's such an introspective, just pure sweet little movie. And it kind of showed like how all across the board Carpenter was. I mean, those early movies, like we said, I mean, Assault, Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York. These are movies that have nothing to do with each other as far as tone.
Yep.
These days, as much as I love Ari Aster and like Hereditary and Midsommar, like,
they're very similar. I mean, the theme.
Yeah, you could tell it's the same dude.
Yeah.
You watch Blackcoat's Daughter and then Gretel and Hansel, you could tell that the same dude made those.
Yep.
And I love those movies, but at the same time, that's what, as a kid, attracted me so much to John Carpenter's movies, is because you didn't know what kind of movie he was going to make next.
Other than the score, you don't know it's a John Carpenter movie. Like, I agree with Nick. The score, that's fine. That's, the scores are totally different, but that's his signature, is the score. Mm-hmm. It's not the actual like style of filming. I mean, other than the incredible amount of polish and depth he seems to add on even the lowest budget features, I do agree with that observation that he really did, like, the technical achievement of what they pulled off on the early films. It's pretty incredible.
What's
Holds
always been
up. I mean, still holds up.
Totally.
Still hold up.
What's always been a bummer to me is like you look at a movie like his last movie, The Ward, and so many people threw that movie under the bus, saying, "Well, all it does is lift off all these tropes. It rips off all these tropes." Not realizing that Carpenter made most of those tropes. So why wouldn't he make the movie that he would typically make?
You're allowed to copy the things that you invented.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, his only misstep for me is Memoirs of Invisible Man, just because it just feels so just bland. But like you never get anything bland from Carpenter, even those early student films. I mean, Captain Voyeur's so interesting that it's only like I think 7 or 8 minutes long, and afterwards you're like, whoa. I mean, even the ending is very Halloween-esque. You know, like it's such a cool precursor to like Halloween that I feel like maybe it doesn't get talked about enough.
No, I mean you really don't hear about any of it. I mean,
and he hates them, but I mean I like.
No,
them.
I mean but you know when you win an Oscar for a student film, you're going to go places, even if people don't realize it. I mean, it's just such a strange trajectory to take, but it just obscenely iconic. I mean, really, whenever you see the question, who's your favorite director, it's really hard for me not to say John Carpenter every single time unequivocally. I mean, he did everything, has done everything, and succeeded at everything. He's not typecast. You can't pigeonhole him. He's just, he's a Renaissance man, as you said. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just incredible.
No, totally. He's always the director that instantly comes to mind when I'm asked who my favorite director is.
When I hear the word director, my mental link is John Carpenter. I don't even know where the hell that came from, but it's like I just think I see the word director, I'm like, John Carpenter.
No,
like
totally.
If you're playing like a mnemonic game, it's like say director, John Carpenter.
Yeah, same.
I don't know.
Same.
It's
always, for me. It's always been like John Carpenter and John Cassavetes. It's always been like this kind of. I think that's kind of like a lot of like the stuff that I tend to write. Like more like talky kind of based stuff, kind of Cassavetes. Like I'm really bad with action, but like dialogue's okay. And I think Carpenter is just like I think the truest example of a director. He insisted on Final Cut, and yes, he insisted on his name above the titles, but he never came off as like one of those like too artsy, like I'm not a director, I'm a filmmaker.
He doesn't come off
like all these dudes that come up with these really great movies that you want to respect so much, but then they're like, no, this is not a horror film. I will not call The Witch a horror film. It's like, do you even know what movie you made? Like,
it feels like he's not a Woody Allen. Like he's not like some nerdy little weirdo like living in.
This is a guy
bubble.
that like plays basketball in Call of Duty when he's bored. Like you know what I mean? Like,
I mean, Brandy, hello.
Hey, sorry for the late pop in.
We're just wading through it. I mean, I guess, what is your pick for your favorite iconic early John Carpenter pre-1984 film? What's the most John Carpenter movie in your opinion?
I guess the first one I think of when I think of John Carpenter is Halloween. I think that's pretty much what a lot of people know.
There's always those people that like get angry about that. Like they kind of almost look down on that, like, no, the thing. And it's like, dude, they're both great, but like if you think of John Carpenter, obviously it's gonna be Halloween,
Yeah, that's the one that's mostly been publicized, I guess. It's still going on.
It's the one that you've definitely heard the soundtrack to.
Yeah.
So, it's been 11 of them.
Yeah.
Well, and every year we have a Halloween, and of course that's one of the things people dress up as. It's kind of hard to dress up as the thing for Halloween.
The fog.
And I mean, think about, we were talking about like basically the immortality of Carpenter and his influence. I mean, the resurgence of basically the plot of The Thing is the premise of one of the hottest games out right now, Among Us.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. It's like people are like, oh, I love this game. It's like, well, you probably love the movie, where there's an alien literally among the crew. It's pretty popular.
even other new movies, like my wife and I just watched The Hateful Eight last night.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
like that movie just feels like The Thing in like
It's the
a
Western
cabin,
thing.
you know, and even some of the things unused, like score is in Hateful Eight. Like the impact of his early career, I think, is just, it's insane on so many different people.
They're just timeless themes, like the enemy among us, the the lone gunslinger, the anti-hero against the world,
Mm-hmm.
with the gun pointed to his head. It's just, I don't know, it's just his thematic choices are universal. His execution just stands out. It just sticks with you.
Yeah, I agree.
But I'm trying to think, what else should we cover here? What have we missed? Brandy, do you have any
Well, I missed
insights?
pretty much everything.
Well, you're bringing a fresh perspective in here. I mean, we kind of mentioned it. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, like, I think one thing that I really love about a lot of his early films is like a lot of the kind of like underlying themes in a lot of them. You know, like the amount of distrust in The Thing, I always loved. The fog, the sins of the father coming back to haunt you is like a really interesting theme. And I think the fact that like Carpenter had a lot to say, even when he wasn't trying, like he never tries to force it, and even though They Live, like everyone will say it's forced, I really don't think it is. I think it's just Carpenter's own kind of reaction to like what was going on at the time. Like, it doesn't feel like an agenda movie as much as it's been pushed into agenda by like, marketing and everything these days. Thanks
Which
to like
really
Obey
plays into
and...
the hand of
exactly
premise
like
of the movie. Like, you just totally missed the point by pushing it commercially.
Exactly, like Obey, that company using all that stuff for marketing. It's like,
well, a lot of movies do that. If you watch it, like even when they do adaptations from books, it has a very clear theme, but when they promote it, they're like, what's actually going to get noticed and bring in the biggest hype, rather than actually focusing on like what it's actually about.
What is it saying versus what did it say?
Yeah, it's all about like what makes us money, how do we make people feel good about it or give them a good jump scare, rather than being like, no, face this actual issue.
Yeah, no, totally. And I love how his films could both be political and not at all at the same time. Like, you could watch Assault on Precinct 13 and just be entertained as hell because it's so much fun to watch. But it also kind of does speak on a lot of things that are kind of going on today if you watch it, and a lot of his movies do, which is really interesting.
They're timeless.
I'm not saying he's like a filmmaking Nostradamus, but at the same time, he's kind of a filmmaking Nostradamus. Like The Thing, They Live, Assault. I mean,
it's like having your fingers on the pulse of society. I mean, it's always been bubbling underneath. I think it's it's a very evocative.
He doesn't pick things that are, oh, this is an issue for now and then it's going to die in a couple of years. It's like, no, this is a really big issue and it's going to go on until we notice it consciously and subconsciously. And
and we don't have to wear our sunglasses to see it. Like, I mean, I think it's a pretty cogent point. I mean, it's just, it's hard to adequately put into words. It's really, really crazy what he's done. And
no, totally. Like that, and like everything that a lot of people thought was a misstep when it came out, I think if it was released today, with like the internet and all these think pieces and word of mouth being what it is, if The Thing came out today, I feel like that would be like so successful. Like all these things that like are like tragedies when you think about them, like The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, all these movies that were so ahead of their time and just like really great that people just weren't ready for at the time. If anything, that's what Carpenter's career has been for me, other than like Halloween and The Fog and a couple like hits. I mean, all of his career has been like,
he's ahead of the curve.
He's like that scene in like Big Trouble, or that scene in Back to the Future, like you're not ready for this right now kind of thing, like that's what Carpenter's films are to me.
But I think that makes it so much better because you kind of get to tap into something that's going to be happening. And also, like, it's not diluted by the current events of what's happening. So they're not putting too much on one particular piece of the film.
I think that makes it more valuable when you rewatch it for sure, because it's like, oh wow, okay, well that totally is a treatise on what's happening now. 30 years later, how would you have known? Like that's just such a good theme that's still relevant. It's prescient. It's just bizarre. Like I said, he had the time machine. I don't know what the hell else to tell you.
I love so many filmmakers like with a passion, but as much as I love some of them, I don't think any of them have the impact on me that like Carpenter did. Like, I think Tobe Hooper should obviously be called a master for all these people, but Tobe Hooper made a good amount of bad movies. You know what I mean? Like Carpenter, with the exception of maybe one or two misfires,
he really has an exceptional resume. Yeah. I think being the mercenary and dictating what you wanted to do and finding the money to do it helped him not have to make a bunch of terrible stuff.
Yeah. But like my thing is, if his movies, like The Thing, wasn't well received, but if those had been well received, how good would his career be right now? Would he have got to make some of these movies that made such an impact and lasted for so long, or would he kind of have been like a sellout, like some people do?
That's fair. I feel like if you're not fighting for it anymore, I think it's a good point.
I agree.
Would he have kept the fire?
Totally. And like, would he have gotten so burned out to the point where he's like, well, screw that, I'm gonna make some really good music now? Like, those albums are so damn good. Like, I probably listen to those more than any albums in history. Like I love so many musicians and bands, but 9 out of 10 times I'm gonna go for like Carpenter scores when I'm writing.
Great background music.
Yeah,
it's just non-obtrusive.
Then he's like a touring musician now. Yeah. Like, how weird is it to like if someone would have told me as a kid that like you could, I'm
gonna go to a concert of my favorite director.
Yeah.
What?
He's a real Renaissance man.
That's what we said that earlier. It's absurd. It's absolutely stupid what he can do.
I like that he's not boxed into one thing. He really gets to pursue all of these things that he's interested in, and he's good at it, and that kind of shows you like your career can go in so many different directions, and you might start out here with something you like, find something else you like, and you can do whatever you want to do within this realm.
He is a middle finger to the industry. Truly,
he's a middle finger to everything. I think like
it's just beautiful.
As much as like that kind of person usually irritates me, because like I'm a pretty like live and let live kind of person, but like there's an interview I saw.
He's a good anti-hero. He's not an antagonist.
There was an interview that he did with a British company on the set of Halloween. I don't know if you two have seen it, and it's basically him slamming Spielberg, like Kubrick, and all these. That's like on the set of your second movie. Like
shit talking the Titans.
Like I love that. Like when Halloween 2 came. Yeah, when Halloween 2 came out, like he went on that one show and called it Abomination and basically said I was drunk, I needed money, I wrote it. Like nobody does that.
Nobody does that and continues to have a great career after it, except for John Carpenter.
I went to a signing once in LA with him, and there was this dude that came in, this really frustrating guy in line with a video camera. And he brought his book and he goes, yes, can you sign it? See you at the movies. And Carpenter goes, I'm not writing that. And he goes, okay, well, here's my camera. Can you direct me? And hands John Carpenter's camera. And he goes, okay. He goes, okay, you see that door? He goes, yeah. And he goes, you walk right out of it.
That's great.
I love that guy. Yeah.
I mean, it's the right amount. He's the curmudgeonly uncle that doesn't go on the drunk racist rants at Thanksgiving. It's just
like the worst he'll do is like play like Borderlands.
Yeah, the worst he'll do is call you an idiot and then hug you later.
It's like my dad does that. I don't mind.
It's just I don't know. He's just he's a cool dude. And I mean, like I said, that we kind of talked about it earlier before we recorded was a parallel that I see in a more modern director is I really like M. Night Shyamalan. He's had some stinkers, but that's because of his weird studio deals. But I mean, he's really been able to do what he wanted to in his career, and I don't think he really has any apologies about that. And like his movies are not very similar either. They have the twist, like that's his thing, right? He's got the twist, but I mean, he's done superhero movies. He's done, sci-fi, horror, suspense, straight up suspense. I mean, I don't know. I see some parallels, and I really hope that he gets to have the career that Carpenter ended up.
What I really love about that, though, is Carpenter, I think, got to the point where instead of learning where maybe he went wrong from time to time, he just kind of gave up, which is really unfortunate to us that want to see more of his movies. What I love about Shyamalan is that once he started partnering up with Blumhouse and he realized, hey, if I get rid of all these huge budgets and studios that'll give me anything I want, and I have these kind of restraints to focus more on storytelling, since then, like, his movies have been
a renaissance.
It's such a return to form. I've loved every single one of them. And I kind of just wish, like, Blumhouse has Carpenter kind of co-producing and scoring the new Halloweens, but, like, dude,
wish they kind of, nudge him in there. I mean, what Blumhouse
give us another
has done,
escape movie.
Yeah, what Blumhouse has done for the industry, I mean, starting with, like, Insidious, I think it's really turned around horror. I mean, we really, really got lost in horror for a while there. It was just garbage.
I wish that they would get back.
Return to suspense.
Totally. I wish they would get back to their model they had at the beginning, was let's give these very popular, successful filmmakers $1, maybe $2 million at the most, and let them do whatever they want because the budgets are so small. That's why, like, Insidious cost, I think, like $1 million, $1.5 million, and it made like 95, I think.
Favorite. I mean, I love it.
Or even, like, I mean, not a lot of people love it. I mean, I'm such a huge fan of it, but even like Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem, I think that's his most unique movie because it's like the one movie that doesn't feel like a Rob Zombie movie that he made, and like those chances, I love Blumhouse, but I think they've gotten to the point where, like, they've had so many successes that they're afraid to kind of, like, bet and gamble.
They've kind of gone Disney. They've kind of gone Disney Studios versus Pixar.
And I love their movies. I mean, I loved Freaky, which I didn't expect to, but I loved that movie. But if they would just give Carpenter even just like a small budget and say, here you go, like, how huge would that be? Because we haven't had a new Carpenter movie since The Ward.
Yeah.
And like, yeah.
Well, and a lot of people are going to watch it regardless, just because his name is attached to it. So they already know that they're going to make
built-in audience,
some type of profit. But it's like, let him do something and show what he's still got to give us.
Look, we know Kurt Russell will come back. More. Okay? We need Kurt Russell and John Carpenter and something else.
Do you know, like, this is the biggest bummer, is that Kurt Russell has came to Carpenter multiple times with projects, and Carpenter's like, no, I just don't like it. Like, like, if you get Carpenter and Kurt Russell back together,
it's
like,
over. I mean, game over.
I'm sure they're worried. I'm sure they're worried about, like, the Escape from LA or the Big Trouble in Little China, like, box office disasters. But it's 2021. There are enough of us.
Yeah, they don't care anymore.
To make that movie successful.
Yeah, there's enough weirdos now to do weird shit and get paid for it. Like,
I want to see Snake Plissken look like Kurt Russell in, like, Hateful Eight or Bone Tomahawk. I want to see,
old,
Snake
grizzled,
Plissken,
worn down Snake Plissken,
like the comic books. Yeah.
Yeah, Lethal Weapon shit. I'm too old for this shit. Like, come on.
Good.
Like, if we can get Mel Gibson and Donald Glover come back for that, come on. We can get old Snake Plissken and Kurt Russell. I mean,
I'm into that.
I just don't. I know. I'm happy John's happy, and obviously it's his life. He can do what he wants to, but somebody's got to get in his ear. We got to get another one. I'm just glad they're giving George Miller the money.
Dude.
He's doing more Mad Max. He's doing the Furiosas. Like, please let the man make whatever the hell he wants to make as long as he's on this earth.
I'm not, and if either of you are, I apologize, but I'm definitely not one of those, like, release the Snyder Cut people.
Oh God, I mean.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Jesus.
I didn't want to, like, step on any toes.
That could save that movie.
Okay, but that said, I would fully support a, like, get Carpenter back in front of the camera or behind the camera, like, thing.
A $200 million. I have a fundraising campaign the same as a Small Country's annual budget.
Yeah.
And just throw it at John Carpenter's front doorstep. Like, here. The only string is you have to make a movie. It can be 5 minutes or 5 hours. You got to make a movie. It's all yours. So, I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, the man is. the man is an industry in himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really all you can say about it.
Then there's so many directors before Carpenter, and I think there's maybe a few after him that kind of became a brand. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
Spielberg, Hitchcock, you know, like Carpenter's very much a brand. You know what you're getting with him. You know what the music's going to sound like in a good way. You know it's going to have that kind of wide lens look. You know, like these days, like all you know from like a lot of current filmmakers, like they're not so much a brand. Like, like I said, I love Ari Aster's films, but the only thing I know watching them is I'm going to need Prozac as soon as they're over.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm going to need therapy as soon as those movies are over.
I mean,
those are ones I have to like sit and reflect and then watch it again just to make sure I understood what was happening.
I mean, maybe a James Wan, early James Wan. I mean, I know he's not doing as much directing anymore now that he's kind of made it, but I would like to see him return to form. That's another one that could have something. I mean, Saw and Insidious and all that.
I think James Wan's definitely, I think, built a career full of like, I mean, he's kind of like everything, you know, director, producer, that kind of stuff. But like, as far as like, you know, that we've all said at this point, which is awesome, you know, as far as Renaissance man, like Carpenter is one of the few, I think the last ones I could think of that creatively does so much of his own stuff, you know, like his later films, he stopped kind of doing the music, which is, I think, so unfortunate. But at the same time, like you look at those early films, especially the era that we've been talking about, like those scores are so iconic, like The Fog, Assault, Halloween. I mean, anyone learning to play the piano, like that's the first thing I learned.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's 11, so easy.
You know, like that. Like I didn't even learn how to play chopsticks. It was the Halloween theme right away. You know, like when I was 17, it was like my year goal just to learn how to play The Fog. You know, like these are such iconic pieces of music that like you rarely get to talk about a filmmaker that you could also kind of veer off and talk about their like musical side, you know, just as much.
When I'm having some badass dream while I'm sleeping, I swear to God, the Escape from New York theme is playing. I mean, it's just like, so I don't know what the hell it is. It's just a driving sense, man. He did it. It's just so evocative. It doesn't make any sense. Like, no one man should have all that power. John Carpenter somehow.
Maybe it's a good thing he's not making movies then.
Maybe he's saving.
Just turns negative. We're like, screw Carpenter then.
You know what? If he's not going to give us anything, then we're not going to give him anything.
You just turn on him.
I'm not going to enjoy another Carpenter movie publicly
until he makes another Carpenter movie.
I'm going to keep my opinions to myself.
I just hope somebody like comes after him that's able to have like the same talent and influence that he had, that like he either directly or indirectly like gets them to the point where he's at. So that
well, hell, maybe we're missing him. I mean, everybody missed Carpenter when he happened. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess we won't realize it until 20 years from now.
I think there's a couple directors I think that have made movies in the last few years that I could see with time getting that same trajectory. Like Adam Egypt Mortimer's one of them. I don't know if you two are familiar with a lot of his stuff. He did some kind of hate, Daniel Isn't Real, and now Arch Enemy.
Okay.
They're so good, and a lot of it's very Carpenter-esque without feeling like, because that's the one thing that takes me out of a lot of movies. If it feels like it's lifting off of Carpenter too much, I'm like, I'll just go watch a Carpenter movie.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a lot of filmmakers that are very like influenced by a lot of stuff that he did, that they kind of use it in a good way to kind of tell stories. And yeah, that's definitely one for me.
Yeah, I like Daniel Isn't Real.
Have you seen Arch Enemy yet?
Mm-mm.
It's good. I can never pronounce the dude's name, but he was Alicide from True Blood.
Okay. Yeah.
Joe, that dude. Yeah, it's basically The Wrestler, but for superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the superhero is basically, he's like a homeless man, and everyone thinks he's just like an alcoholic at a bar, you know, talking about all these stories of fighting on a different world. And it's this very gritty, almost like Carpenter-like film. about this kind of like man who you don't know most of the movie if he's like full of crap and he's just like a homeless man who's mentally ill, or he's a fallen superhero.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost feels like a missing
really cool.
Carpenter film. Yeah, it's out right now, I think, on like video on demand in theaters. But yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, well, I'm sold. I'll have to check it out. Yeah, I mean that has all the pieces of a Carpenter plot.
Yeah. I mean, even the lead, like it feels like he would have been played by either Kurt Russell or Roddy Piper if it was in the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, well, maybe that'll be the Stone Cold lock of the century, Jerry. You may have hit the nail on the head.
Years from now, I'm gonna want a paycheck for that. No, I'm just kidding.
This will be your film Stradamus pick,
right? Just watching all the Carpenter movies. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. We've went over so much. Like I'm trying to rack my brain. Yeah.
Talk about it for 12 hours. I mean, and we've really avoided really digging deep into any of the individual films, which I think is good for a retrospective. So, I mean, I guess maybe we can cap it off with, I guess that's what we asked Brandy when she joined. Like, what to you epitomizes John Carpenter's early career? What film stands out to you the most out of all of them?
For me, I hate to make every question like a really complex answer because
it's a
but like I think
we're
for me
allowed
it's
to
kind
wax poetic.
It's a combination of two things for me. My favorite Carpenter movie, which is my favorite movie of all time, is Halloween. Like it's just a perfect movie. I think that's my favorite movie. I think his best movie, a movie that when I think of John Carpenter, like it immediately comes to mind, is The Thing. Because like if there's a master class in not just horror, but I think in filmmaking, it's that one. Everything from the score,
lighting, effects,
cinematography,
pacing. Yeah,
I mean, God, even in those early movies, like the Dean Cundey, John Carpenter teamwork of those movies, like I think The Thing, even acting. I mean, it's just there isn't a single weak performance in that movie. Like there's even my favorite movies. There are things that I would tweak about them, very few movies are perfect, Jaws, Psycho, that kind of stuff. They're perfect. I think The Thing is one of them that is. Like there's a single bad thing about that one. That's what I would say.
Hey, I guess it's an ensemble cast too. I mean, really, you got like Wilford Brimley and they all just fit so well. Nobody's overpowering, even though it's obviously a story fixated on McCready because he's the anti-hero. He's having to clean up everybody else's damn messes because nobody else can act right. But yeah. I mean, my favorite Carpenter is it's Escape from New York. I always like to give him credit for Halloween 3 too, even though it's not directly. I mean, he has a lot of influence, but it is Tommy Lee Wallace is the director of it. But that's my favorite Carpenter universe movie. But yeah, Escape from New York. And The Thing it's a perfect movie. It has endless replayability and like discussion in it. Like you can watch that every time and come away with a different opinion, like in theory. And we just did a watch party for it in our group. Like we came up with like 15 different scenarios. Like it's an endless source of debate, and I think that is a hallmark of a great film if it makes you think and want to talk about it.
That, and like with my kids, I try to show them like if they want to watch like horror films. I mean, obviously I'm not going to show them like Martyrs and like really crazy movies, but at the same time I try to show
Green
them
Inferno, Eli Roth cannibal movies.
No,
Jesus.
But I try to like show them movies that I think would be their speed as far as like attention. And The Thing is a movie that I didn't think that they would like, but that's the movie out of any Carpenter movie, aside from Halloween, obviously. Like that's the one movie that my kids are always asking me to watch. Like it's such a slow burn, but even for like kids, I mean, I saw it when I was their age, and it's impossible not to be glued to the screen watching that movie. Everything from like the effects to like I said, the cinematography. Like, it's such a beautiful horror movie. Like, it's
just
gorgeous.
so tight. The whole package is just so well put together. I mean, it is lightning in a bottle.
I watched The Thing, like, I don't know how old I was, but that slow burn got me, and I wasn't used to watching those. I'm used to where you know what's going on. You know something bad's about to happen. It comes up pretty quick. It makes, you know, a big impact in the beginning, or at least halfway in the middle until the end. So the first time I watched The Thing, I was just like unimpressed, I guess. But I didn't really get it. And I mean, now as I'm older and I rewatch it, I have a lot more appreciation for it. But as a kid, that wasn't something I enjoyed. I wanted, because all the movies I remember watching that were horror movies, it was now, you know what's going on. So that's pretty
I can see that.
Attention to be able to, like, yes, I like this slow burn, and I like this movie, and I can appreciate it.
I think it's because, like, that movie in particular does a really good job on, like, giving you conflicting emotions. Like, when I showed it to my kids, like, for the first, like, 15 minutes, they were like, well, why are those guys shooting that dog? Like, this is not cool. Why are they trying to shoot that dog? So
that comes out the gate on some crazy shit.
Yeah, so, like, right away, like, they got hooked being like, what is going on? Like, why are we following these jerks? And then as the film goes on, they're like, whoa. You know, so, like, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's just... There are no words.
Yeah.
We are very lucky to have lived at a time to appreciate his work. And still have the chance to get new stuff out of him because he's still around. Hopefully.
Fingers crossed.
For as long as he's healthy and wants to be here, he'll be here.
Yeah. Do you think that he would be like one of those people that maybe he's got stuff in production that we're not going to know about and it's not going to be released until after he passes away?
I don't think that he's made anything, but I know that, like, he and his wife, like, have about, like, 6 or 7 different projects at different studios in some capacity.
They are prolific.
You know? Yeah. I don't think he's done anything right now, but I'd really love it if he would. It would make me happy.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, he owes us nothing, but we want everything from him, right? I mean, it's just...
Yeah.
There was an interview that he did with Shock Till You Drop a few years ago that I watch at least once a month just because I laugh at it, where he's going over all these newer filmmakers. And he's just like, yeah, you know, Eli Roth with his Hollywood hair, you know, Darren Aronofsky that secretly hates horror films, you know, let them have it. Let them have it. I'm too old. So, like, you know, while I'd love for him to do more, like you said, like, he doesn't owe us, and like, I understand if he doesn't because he's kind of over it, but at the same time, you know, like I said, like a million times already, it sure would make me happy.
No, I mean, I think he is. He is Snake Plissken. He just...
Yep.
He doesn't care. He doesn't need it. He doesn't really...
I think that's what's great.
If the mood struck him, yeah, it's perfect.
If you really think about it, like, most of these characters that we love are John Carpenter.
It's him.
And you know, the crotchety guy that just wants nothing to do with things, but he's kind of, like, expected to, you know?
It's like, I got to clean up this damn mess. You know, I'm the only responsible person in the house. Like, come on. It was my day off. You know, I don't know. There's just something, there's some like deep respect and appeal for that kind of a person. I think everybody appreciates somebody who's like that. Somebody that's so reliable. I mean, yeah, you can verge on like being taken for granted, which sucks, but like, there's always a place for a person like that in everybody's life. Just somebody who, you know, when the shit hits the fan and it all comes down to it, they're going to be the reluctant hero, but they'll stand up for what's right and defend what's needed. And I think that's just that is a core Western theme. I mean, I think it all comes back to that point you made earlier in the discussion: is it's all Western and we're living in it. We're all in the little village, you know, row there, waiting at the saloon doors to see when the shootout starts. So
yeah, definitely,
he's the sheriff. So whenever he draws his last gun, we'll be there.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess we'll cap it off with that. I think that's a good
way to go out, I think.
I mean, I like to appreciate, thank you both for showing up, and we'll talk about some more John Carpenter in our second half retrospective. So recharge your batteries and find some new accolades to heap on the giant. But I'm Shelby. That's Jerry. That's Brandy. And this was Scream Stream. And thank you all for tuning in.